Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Betty Eats podcast, where we talk about real recipes created by real people. And this includes food bloggers, recipe developers, cookbook authors, and we get to learn how to spot good recipes not made by AI and ones that you'll want to cook again and again. So today we have Nicki Sizemore. Nicki, I'm very impressed by your resume. You're a trained chef, a professional recipe developer. You've been a food blogger for a very long time. And, I did not know this until recently, but you were a food stylist and, you've published 3 cookbooks. I mean, you've kind of done it all in the food world,
A little bit.
So welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here on the other side of the conversation because I have a podcast too. And so usually I'm in your role and it's so fun to not be in your role and to be on this side. So thank you for having me.
It's so exciting. Well, I know that you are coming off fresh from a vacation. I didn't want to ask you right away about your vacation, but I kind of want to talk about the food in Nicaragua and how just what you learned there and kind of what impressed you and what you're bringing home from that before we talk about other things.
What a great question. I think one of the things that stuck with me was simplicity of the food. The ingredients, everything that I ate was so fresh. I mean, so much fresh fruits I had never tasted before, which was really fun. Gallo pinto, which is rice and beans, which after eating that for breakfast and lunch every day, my body is now craving it. It's interesting how that happens. And then the meats in Guatemala, all of the beef, I didn't realize this, but they are known for their meat. And all of their beef is pasture raised. It's,
Wow.
Wherever you drive, at least where we were, we landed at the central airport in Managua. We drove to the coast, and everywhere we were, the animals are just part of the landscape. So there are cows walking everywhere. There's chickens, there's goats. They're just part of the communities, which I found so beautiful. What if, because I feel so separated in America from the foods we eat. And there it was just part of life. And I have to say, for those of you vegetarians, you're going to hear me say this and be like, well, this is cruel, but I am a meat eater. And here we're seeing these animals. But I have to say the flavor of the meat was incredible. It was so flavorful, unlike so much of the industrialized meats that we get here. So, and then the craftsmanship, in the sense we visited this, I don't know if you'd call it a factory. It was a workshop where they create rosquillas. I don't think I'm going to say it right. I don't speak Spanish, so I'll have to look it up. But there are these little round crackers, and they're made with corn flour and an aged cheese. So the aged cheese gives them this really umami kind of backbone. And then some of them, they sprinkle their sugar. It's an unprocessed sugar, and they are baked in a wood-fired hearth. And the contrast for the sweet ones of the sugar caramelized on top, and then you have that savory kind of umami cracker underneath, and they dip it in their coffee. And their coffee in Nicaragua is extraordinary. So that was unlike anything I've ever tried in my life. And as someone in the food industry, that is such a pleasure for me to not only meet the people behind some of these foods who are crafting them, but also to taste things that I would never have thought to pair in my own head or in my own life. So those are just a few of the examples. Beautiful seafood. We had a lot of fish. And plantains. That was the other thing. I love plantains, and we ate a lot of plantains. Maybe the most interesting preparation for me was mashed plantains that they stuffed with a creamy cheese, almost like a Mexican Oaxacan fresh cheese. And then they pan fried it. So it looked like an empanada, but it was just with plantain and then the cheese on the inside. And I thought that was so brilliant. And I can't eat gluten. So that was a wonderful thing to do to get that feel of an empanada without having to use dough or flour.
Wow. Wow. And, I think that is so interesting because we don't eat a lot of plantains here in the US. I mean, I see them at the market, and I know that in a lot of South American cooking, they use plantains. And every once in a while, I'll pick one up. The only place I've ever been to in South America is Venezuela. This was a million years ago, and that's where I was introduced to that. And it's so interesting that a lot of times it is served with a savory dish, because you think about bananas, but it's kind of, but not really. But they
Well, the
serve it.
green plantains are really starchy. So the green
Yeah.
plantains, the tostones they are savory. They've got a hint of sweetness, I'd say. But then once you let them ripen and they turn fully black, then they turn really sweet. And then you've got the caramelized kind of sweet plantains that we think about. But it's like this amazing fruit that is served in both preparations. You're exactly right, from the savory to the sweet.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I love going back to your comment just about the simplicity. I think that that is so true that, a lot of times, and this is just the way it is. Sometimes we overcomplicate things,
A
here
lot
in the
of
US,
times.
and we just add so much. And
Yeah.
when a lot of times it is just the
Yeah.
simple preparation, minimal ingredients. That way, the ingredients really shine.
Yeah.
So I
That's
really,
exactly it. I mean, I'm a recipe developer, so I'm constantly trying to think of creative new ways to do things. And the reality is, sometimes the best meals you have, I mean, one of the meals we had was at a little tiny restaurant, and it was just fresh fish cooked very simply with plantains on the side. There was rice and beans. It was very simple, but the fish was so good and just seasoned just right. And it's like, that's all you need sometimes for the most memorable meal.
yeah, yeah. That sounds wonderful. Well, I'm so glad that you had a wonderful time there, and I loved seeing your videos and just the photos that you posted. They were just gorgeous. So
It was so beautiful.
yeah. Well, so how did you talked about being a recipe developer, and how did you get started in this world? Like, take us back to the beginning.
Take us back. I feel like that's a song. Okay. It goes back far. I was always the kid who was fascinated by food shows. I mean, this is going to age me, but there was no Food Network when I was really young. The Food Network started, I think, when I was like maybe junior high and then high school. And I certainly loved it. I watched so much Food Network when I was that age. But as a kid, even just watching Jacques Pepin on PBS, I've always found food fascinating and fun. And when in college, I was an anthropology major. And it was interesting because my senior thesis I did my studies in Senegal, and it really took place in kitchens. It was studying women's perceptions of their changing roles. But I didn't even realize then that food could be a vocation. I thought you either were a restaurant chef or there wasn't really a food industry that I knew about. And I remember meeting my guidance counselor as I was getting ready to graduate. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And all of the companies that I circled, she had all the big companies, this huge spreadsheet, and they were all food companies. And I just still wasn't piecing things together. I had a very troubled relationship with food at the time, which I've talked a lot about. So it was this weird, and I had studied in France in college. And so I had this very strange relationship with food that I was in the process of healing. And at the core of that has always been this passion for flavor and creativity. I've always been an art kid. And what has happened now as food has become my form of art, I would say. But eventually, so graduated college, moved to New York City with my then boyfriend, who's my husband. And I was working in PR across the street from the Chelsea market, right when the Chelsea market opened. And eventually quit my job, went to work at a store over there that was also an importer distributor, started doing marketing for them. Food Network, in the meantime, moved into the Chelsea market. And all of a sudden, I realized there was a huge world of food that I could join without having to be in a restaurant kitchen. I don't have the nervous system to handle a restaurant kitchen, that kind of intensity. I don't keep up with that very well. So that was when it kind of dawned on me that this whole world existed. And there were so many opportunities that didn't involve working in a restaurant. And I actually applied. I was accepted. I was about to join the NYU had just launched their Master's Food Studies program. And I think I was like 2 or 3 weeks out from school starting, and was at an event for the job I was working at. And it was, one conversation sometimes changes your life. And I was talking to this guy who I think was an agent for Food Network people. And he asked me, he said, "Oh, do you want to cook food or do you just want to talk about food?" And I was like, "Oh, no, I really want to cook food. I really want to learn how to cook food." And he's like, "Well, why aren't you going to culinary school? Why are you getting your master's in academia?" And I was like, "My gosh, this is not the right choice." And it was an instant knowing that I was meant to go to culinary school. And I didn't, growing up, I grew up in the Midwest. My mom is a great cook, but when I was growing up, she did not have time. Both my parents worked full-time jobs. My dad traveled all the time. We ate tons of fast food, tons of carry out. We'd always have our Sunday night dinner together. And now she cooks all the time. But at that, growing up, I wasn't like at my grandmother's apron strings. I really did learn from like the Food Network, but I didn't have like these skills. So going to culinary school was the best thing I could have done. It was absolutely in the cards for me. Everyone thought I was crazy. This was before, I think going to culinary school now is kind of like normalized, but back then everyone's like, "What are you doing? Like, you're not going to grad school, you're going to culinary school." And I had so much fun. And that's when I started my freelance career. Like I said, I did some stages in restaurants, but I never had an intention of working in restaurants. So I worked in magazine test kitchens. I did PR and marketing for food companies. I started teaching cooking classes regularly in the city for a cooking school. And literally, it was like I spent a decade trying on all these different hats. I mean, I did everything. I would write a bit for online publications. I would teach. I would do marketing. I was in production. And then eventually, my husband and I moved to Connecticut, and that was really when food production started, like video. So this, now we see food videos everywhere. We make them with our phone. But before that, it was revolutionary to have for a brand like Kraft or I don't know, Walmart or whatever it is, to do food videos. Like, this is how you use these different ingredients. And that's where I got into food styling. And so that was the start of that trajectory of my career. And that lasted for many years. And then we moved to the Hudson Valley 12 or 13 years ago. And I was doing all of the things. And I had a 1.5-year-old baby, and we wanted another. And eventually I got to the place of total burnout. So I decided to cut back on all the things and focus my attention on a food blog. I had a food blog the whole time, kind of as like, oh, I'll just throw recipes up there so people can see what I do. So and plus creating recipes has always been my passion. So I would throw things on this website, but I never thought about it as a way to make money, or I never thought of it as a business. And then I had that shift in perspective, and I was like, okay, let me see if I can make this into a business. And so I did. I quit all of the little freelance things. I said no. I focused my attention on the blog, and it was really fun. That's when I got my first book deal and did all of that. Sorry, this is a very long story, but I'll wrap it up really quickly.
I know. Love it. I love hearing it.
It's eventually I burned out on the blog, and there's many reasons for that. And I can tell you those reasons if you want to get into it, but a massive burnout. And that's when I started my Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter and podcast as a way to come back home to my voice, to find my voice. And really, I think this is really my path. And so was the blog. It's just that I entered a new season of life where there was something else I wanted to say and something else I wanted to explore. So here we are. That's kind of the big.
But I think that story is such a good reminder. I think sometimes when we start off on a path, we think that path is just going to be, this is it.
Yeah.
And, we forget that the path is kind of, it can go a lot of different ways and a lot of twists and turns, but we eventually come to the path that we're supposed to be on,
Well, I love that. I try to explain that to my daughters because I grew up and both of my parents, my dad worked for the same company my entire life. My mom was a teacher. She worked at the same school my entire life. I didn't realize that that was even an option. To me, it almost felt like failure. Like you can't
Mm,
have a steady job. Whereas now it's the opposite for me. It's like, no, this is how we grow. And I think it depends on the human. I think some people have that path and that's great for them. And then other people need all of these experiences and this diversity, and that's how they grow. So I feel like the generation behind us really gets that in a way that more so than me sometimes, where they
mm.
see success in a very different light than maybe you or I did when we were growing up.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I especially my kids are all kind of in their 20s now, and they've done various things. And similarly, I have reminded them nothing is ever wasted. Whatever experience
Beautiful.
you've had or whatever job you've had, even if it's working at the ice cream shop,
Yeah.
nothing is wasted because you're learning skills that you can bring forward into the next thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, and how many times have you heard stories of people who wind up doing something and then they think, oh, but the seed was planted back,
Yeah. Yes.
years, decades
Absolutely.
ago. And
Yep.
just that remembrance of like, oh, I know how to do this. So yeah, so that's really beautiful, just how things have turned out. And I totally get what you mean about the blog. I think the blogging world has changed so much. I'm fairly new to it, but I just remember reading tons of blogs, and it's a different game now, I think for sure. And
Yeah.
I can see how there would be burnout and just kind of is this it?
Yeah,
So,
and it's funny because I still have my blog and I've come to re-embrace it just in the past couple of months, but I had to step away from it because what happened was I know we're going to talk about recipe creation.
mhm,
And I was creating like this food, the recipes I create, this is my creative fire. And I was creating for search engine optimization. I was writing for search engine optimization, which for people who don't understand that, it's like if people are going to type something in Google and they want to find this recipe, there's a whole industry behind how you write for a blog so that people can find your content. Because a blog, at least all the blogs I know of, aside from Substack, the way that it becomes a business is through advertisements on that site. And the only way you can make money off of that is traffic. So you're trying to maximize traffic. So I was writing for Google. I was not writing from my heart. I was creating recipes. And this is just at the end of my journey. This wasn't the whole experience and I learned so much, but I was writing recipes and creating content like kind of like a robot. And
mhm.
now, like I said, I've turned back. I still have the blog. Now I'm approaching it with a new lens and updating it here and there, but putting more of my voice back into it because it is still part of my business. But I had to step away and I had to find my voice. And really, ironically, during this time, I literally lost my voice for like 3 months. I've never lost my voice in my life. And it was kind of like the universe was saying, if you're not going to listen to, and I had massive body burnout too. I became really sick, undiagnosed, all the things. And it was almost like, honey, it's time to stop and it's okay to stop. Take a stop, take a pause, recalibrate, and mind, body, spirit, food flowed in so naturally. It was a seed. It was a seed that I had planted like 2 years prior. My husband and I had been sitting on the couch and I think he came up with that name and I wrote it on a document on my computer and I was like, that's it. But it took me 2 years to know what to do with it. Or I don't think the time was right, really, to be honest. But now it's kind of coming full circle where it's like the blog still has meaning. And now I have this outlet to speak from my heart and to do the seeking that I want to seek as a writer and a food explorer and have the blog. So I didn't have to burn it down is kind of what I'm trying to say. I think that a lot of people think like if something isn't working, like it feels good just to burn it down. But sometimes it's just a matter, of like taking a step away and letting it breathe for a while, letting yourself breathe for a while. And then it's probably, maybe there's a way that you can reincorporate it.
And I love that you're talking about kind of putting your voice back into your blog. I think that is a real thing, especially now with the rise of AI recipe
Yeah,
sites. And they
absolutely.
are talking about robots. These
Yeah.
are basically
Yeah.
robots crafting these recipes and pulling them
Yeah.
together. I see it all the time. And I have friends, I love them, that they're reposting these robot generated recipes on Facebook. And you
Oh,
look at the
yeah.
photo and it's like, okay, friends, sushi doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
whatever doesn't look like. Cranberries aren't that size.
Yeah.
But they don't know. And so I think that with the rise of these AI created, generated recipes, untested, they are all
Yeah.
untested.
Yeah.
I think that people are going to eventually catch on and be like, no, I need a human voice in this. I need some backstory on this. And so, I think that that is really wise, what you're doing.
I do believe in connection and the AI recipe. My husband's a musician and I'm a recipe, I'm a food writer. And it's really interesting to see how AI is going to change our industries. He works in music for film and television. And for a while there, I was like terrified of it. And now I feel like I need to hone into the faith that there is some element of human craftsmanship that we need. And sure, AI can be helpful in a lot of ways, but when it comes to recipes, for me, that human connection is paramount. But as you said, even more so, just from a practical standpoint, these recipes that I create are tested minimum usually 3 times, and if not more. And so I want to provide my readers with something that I know works and that's foolproof and that they can trust. So I think creating those connections is going to be more important than ever, where I know we all have like the recipe developers that we go to. And I think those relationships, I hope this is kind of my hope for the future, is that those relationships strengthen. Even though we can still use AI in helpful ways, I just believe in this human connection element. And I believe we can create something that's more heart-centered and also useful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what I loved your idea about AI being useful as sort of like a tool. It's something we can pull out of a toolbox and say, okay, do this, whatever this task is. But obviously AI can't cook the recipe and it can't taste it. It doesn't have a flavor-o-meter yet.
Yeah.
And so that really is that human element that just, for now anyway, cannot be replaced. And I think like you said, as time goes on, I think people are going to see there's something missing here. There's something that's, an intangible that humans bring to that. And it's, not just a cut and paste and let's hope this works.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, food is money, and we're seeing that right now with egg shortages. Food is money, and I believe it's a very wise investment to spend money on food to nourish ourselves. I mean, this is what I do, but to make a recipe that might not be tested unless you have a strong background in the kitchen and a lot of confidence, that could go awry. And of course, we don't want to see any wasted money or wasted food if it's not necessary.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think about, not to bash on any social media, but I think a lot of times those viral recipes or just things, when you've been cooking for a family for, 20 or 30 years, you kind of get it. Sometimes I'll look at something and I'll be like, yeah, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Yep.
And other times I'll be like, oh, I never thought about that. And I'll make it and then it will go in the trash because it's just, for whatever reason, that is not how it's going to go.
Yeah.
But I think that you bring up a good point about how to spot recipes. Like what is your criteria? Everybody kind of has different criteria, but what do you look for when you see a recipe online and you think, okay, I might try that, or like, yeah, I'm never trying that?
Yeah, it's a great question because my daughters, I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they both love experimenting in the kitchen, especially with baked goods. My youngest loves to cook everything. My oldest loves baked goods. And of course, she's getting most of her recipes on Pinterest, on little short videos, which I'm like, so we've had a lot of this discussion of how do you spot a good recipe and a bad recipe. And especially with baked goods, I'm always like, girls, if you see the recipes are in order, the order that you're going to use them in, that's a sign that someone at least has a little bit of knowledge or that they're paying attention to details, because baking is about details. And I'm all about intuitive cooking and creativity. When it comes to baking, we are looking at details. Also, for recipes that include gram measurements for dry ingredients, I think that's a great signifier that the recipe has been tested. that the person behind the recipe has some sort of knowledge in testing recipes, because within the world of baking, it's just so much more accurate if you have weighed ingredients. That's not to say all recipes are that way, but you're certainly going to have a more accurate final result. I tell the girls, if you can find a recipe in grams, because that way, especially, like I said, my girls and I are all gluten-free. So we're using a lot of alternative flours. And the way that you pack a cup measurement of almond flour can vary considerably in the way that you pack it. So for me and my recipes, 1 cup of almond flour is 100 grams. But if you pack that in, it can be anywhere from like 130 to like 150 grams if it's packed. So think about the texture of that cake or those cookies that you're going to make. That's going to make a big influence or big impact in terms of texture. So those are 2 things I look for. I'm always encouraging Ella, my oldest, to step away from social media when it comes to baked goods, because I would guess 60% of the time they turn out terrible. And she's got enough baking acumen to make something good. It's not usually throwawayable. I shouldn't say terrible. That was a strong word. But they just turn out not great. Whereas if she finds a recipe online or obviously in a cookbook, I shouldn't say obviously in a cookbook. There are plenty of cookbooks with recipes that aren't always tested. But when we find a recipe online, we can look at it, we can see it, we can gauge if we think it's going to work or not. But she's often just like following the video on what they're doing. And it's a big likelihood it's not going to turn out especially great.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I had Martin Sorge on the program a couple times ago, and, he won the Great American Baking Show, and he said something very similar. He said, if I look at a recipe and if it's not in grams, I'm not making it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was kind of his, his plumb line, like, no.
Well, and for me too, I love baking, and I've talked a lot about this in my newsletter, but I've come to baking late in my life. So in culinary school, you either do the pastry, at least the school I was at, you were in the pastry arm of things, and that was its own separate kitchens, or you were in the culinary side of things. And we still did pastry. We had like sections of pastry, but I was very firmly a culinary cook. I am not to this day a technical baker at all, but I have found this real love of baking rustic, simple, wholesome. It really has become a form of therapy for me. And I will say, being not a technical baker, it's just so much easier if you can just weigh things. Like, you don't have to even get your measuring cups out of the kitchen. You just pour. There's a lot less mess. So for people who are looking for more ease, who maybe just want like simple, it's easier. So that's like a win-win for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, so you were talking about being in culinary school. Mm-hmm. What do you feel like was a huge takeaway? The whole thing, I'm sure, was a huge takeaway, but what do you feel like is something that a home cook would really benefit from? I mean, you have that background, and sometimes it is by trial and error. I know I didn't go to culinary school, and sometimes that education comes from like reading tons of cookbooks or and
absolutely.
Trial and error. I've made my share of dinners that were like okay, but it was like it filled the need for that dinner, the family's dinner.
Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
that is sometimes all you need is just an okay, let us get fed. And that's totally fine. It's interesting that you said that about culinary school. There is one thing, I'm going to tell you my main takeaway, but I'm also going to share something that I learned that was a game changer that I did not learn in culinary school, but it was a cooking class. So before I went to culinary school, I went when I was 24, I think. For my birthday, I asked from my almost husband, because we hadn't gotten married yet, for a knife skills class. And it actually was at a different culinary school in this city at the time. But I asked, this is really smart. I said he had to take it with me. So we did the knife skills class, and really that was a game changer because learning knife skills is probably the easiest way to improve efficiency in the kitchen. And learning knife skills with a partner that you live with means that they also have those skills to help you in the kitchen.
Very smart.
Because he's fully my sous chef, and he's a great cook in his own right. But ironically, in culinary school, they never taught knife skills. So I'm so grateful for that. And it's funny, I used to teach a knife skills class. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I should offer that as part of my newsletter offerings, because it really is. It really is key. And you can, with that practice, it's like any other sport, with that muscle memory, it becomes so you can cut the prep time in half. That being said, in culinary school, they never taught us knife skills. So luckily I had done that class so that I could really practice. We learned like weird things, like how to tournage a carrot or a potato, which is the most useless skill I will never learn and like never use in my entire life. So, but the one thing, and I actually talk about this in my new book that's coming out next year, that has stuck with me that any home cook can practice is to drop into their senses, drop into your senses when cooking. So most often when we were cooking, so as to give you an idea, in culinary school, we all had our own stovetop. We all had these little units that we're cooking on. And the chefs, who were these French guys and women, they had their tall toques and they'd walk around like yelling instructions. But the instructions most often were about our senses. Like, what are you hearing? What are you hearing? Like taste, taste, taste. I still hear that refrain in my head when I'm at my stove. That was so ingrained in us. Taste, 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 taste as you go, taste as you go, taste as you go. But then also, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? All of the senses that it was more so that than it was the technique that we were learning in our book. It was like, be completely present for what you're doing. And it's interesting because in my book is all about finding more presence and ease in the kitchen through the power of intention. But the side benefit to doing that is that you do become a better cook because you're available to respond to the food in front of you instead of being tied to a recipe. So how many times, I have done this so many times, where you're making a recipe, I'm making a recipe, and I'm like, this just doesn't feel right, but they're telling me to do it. They're telling me to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then I'm like, oh, I should have listened to my intuition. So when we're really engaged in our senses, even if it says to cook that steak for 6 minutes on, this heat, as we're cooking it, instead of being beholden to that instruction, we can really be beholden to our senses and to think, you know what, I can hear the oil sputtering so loud. It sounds like firecrackers. That to me is signaling to me that needs to be toned down. Or I'm starting to get whiffs of charcoal. That's not what I want my steak to taste like. I'm going to turn that down. So I think that's honestly the biggest takeaway. Anybody can learn to cook. You do not need to go to culinary school to learn to cook. Practice and knife skills and being in your body, being in your senses are my biggest takeaways.
That's really good. Now that you say that, I think about kind of the recipes. I love that, we're not married to them, that we can adjust them how we need to. But I really love that idea of, in a recipe, when it says it should look like this, or, because every stove is different, every oven is different, every grill is different. And so, and every cut of meat is kind of different,
Yeah.
And so I love that idea of looking for certain clues, or smelling or hearing certain clues, like this is what this should look like, or this is what this should sound like or smell like. That's really great. And I love that of like even incorporating that into like the recipe instructions,
Yeah. Well, that's another great, I didn't even think about that, but absolutely. When you're looking to see if a recipe, how accurate or how trustworthy the recipe might be, to have those bits, those juicy little bits of detail that I don't think AI can create that at this point. So those might be a great way to signify if the recipe, it was written by a human and if it was tested.
Yeah. Yeah. So many things. Well, what you do, obviously, a lot of recipe testing.
Yeah.
You're working on a new book. What are the things that inspire you? I mean, you have such a background and a trained background, but I'm sure you also get inspiration too just from life in general, or your kids. Like
Yeah.
what do you look, or how do you get inspired for the recipes that you create? Like recently, I was just going to say these cauliflower tacos. I'm like kind of obsessed with now. I'm like, I got to make these cauliflower tacos.
I love that question because this is like the real joy for me is that drop of inspiration. And it comes from many different places. I'd say sometimes it comes from like, I'll be reading something and it's like this spark and it's a feeling like, oh, ooh, and then it'll just kind of percolate into something. And then sometimes it's from a reader or, if I'm writing a book, even if I'm writing a book, I will have a chapter outline and I'll know I need to fill maybe 10 slots, 10 different recipes within the chapter. But I have found, luckily I've gained this wisdom finally, I cannot force recipes to happen. They have to come in, they have to drop in with that spark of inspiration. And sometimes that spark of inspiration comes. I tore out of a magazine last summer. There was somebody, I don't even know who it was. There was a recipe and it was cauliflower in this creamy sauce. It may have been in Bon Appetit. And I was like, I want to do a cauliflower recipe in a creamy sauce. And I wrote one out, but it was a very mental exercise. Like, this looks good, I'm going to do this. And I just never felt like it lacked magic. It lacked that spark. And it wasn't until I was standing at my fridge one night trying to think of a side dish to make for dinner. And the creamy cauliflower thing just kind of came into my head. And it ended up becoming a cauliflower gratin, but it actually uses a cashew cream that's infused with Parmesan instead of heavy cream because that's what I had. But it ended up being like this revolution. My family's obsessed with this side dish. So it's like this combination of me being patient enough to trust that inspiration is going to find me. I don't need to find it. And the pressure sometimes, my favorite way to develop recipes is when I literally am in my kitchen and I feels like I've got nothing in the fridge. And all of a sudden it becomes this game of what can I create? And usually in those moments, I'm not in work mode at all. And maybe that's why it's so fun. It's like this game of like playing Tetris with all of these ingredients I have, and it has nothing to do with work. It's just that I get to be in the kitchen and fun and having fun and cooking. And then I would say a surprisingly high number of times, like it actually turns out, and then I can go back and like develop it and write it out and make it into something testable. But that's my favorite way because maybe that's why I love to cook. It's like I just get to be in my full creative expression. I'm not doing it for anybody else except for like painting a picture on a blank canvas. I get to just create something from scratch just for me and my family to play with. So that's my favorite.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like a little serendipity when, like you said, you're having a fun time, and I think that a lot of times when you are having fun, that creativity then can just really blossom and bloom, because you're not in work mode and we're like, okay, this has got to really look good for the photos.
And even sometimes like that creativity comes even in just ease. Like today I have a newsletter out and it's with a sheet pan Caesar salad. And it's just, it's so simple. It's chicken thighs and broccoli and chickpeas. They all get roasted together. You make a creamy Caesar dressing. And it's just so good because it's warm and cold. But that recipe, it's not like it's super creative, but you know what? It's the ease of it that just kind of came together seamlessly. And to me, sometimes that feels just as exciting as pairing new flavors. Because to be honest, most of my recipes are pretty simple. I'm not one to use arcane ingredients that you're only going to buy once. Like that is not how I stock my pantry. So what can we do with what we already have? And that can be the creativity of just streamlining things to make it easier for people. That's also really satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is really key too, because that's how most people cook. They don't have like, Aleppo pepper or, whatever it is. Whatever thing that a lot of times there are certain ingredients that become very trendy or whatever. Like a lot of times people just don't have that or they don't want to track it down. And so I really love that simplicity, being able to swap out certain things too, like if you don't have this, use this. And
yes. That's what I try to do because there are things like Aleppo pepper that I love and I don't expect everybody to have it.
Yeah, I have a hard time for whatever reason tracking it down. I don't know why
Yeah.
on the West
Yeah.
Coast. I don't know. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough, but
Yeah. Who knows?
yeah. But well, the recipe you just talked about sounds delicious, but I have to go look that one up now in your newsletter today. Well, tell us the tried and true recipe that you're going to share with listeners today. What is that
Ooh,
one?
I think I'm going to do a recipe for a salmon rice bowl, which kind of sounds boring, but again, like I'm always looking. I have a book called Build a Bowl. Bowls are my
Mm.
favorite way to eat still because I developed this book came about when I had a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old, and we found we were eating down to the kids level. And if for any of you parents out there, when you have young kids, like dinner time is stressful. It
Hmm.
really is. As
Yeah.
much as we'd like to make believe it's not, it is. And you're trying to appeal to all these different palates. And my husband and I were like eating down to the level of the kids, but I was like, wait, I'm still craving beautiful, vibrant food. So I started doing one bowl dinners. And back then, my 1-year-old would just get little portions of each thing and she could eat whatever. My 6-year-old could make her own plate. And
Mm.
she could therefore have agency in what she was choosing. Our rule has always been you have to try everything, but what goes on your plate is your choice. So sometimes that would look like one floret of broccoli and a whole bunch of rice or something, and that's fine. She's gotten over it, and they do. And then my husband and I could build a bowl. So like a whole grain, a vegetable, protein, a quick and easy, no quick sauce, and something fun to garnish.
I love that.
That is really, and so with these bowls that I'm going to share with you, there's the salmon is cooked in a really quick and easy marinade, but then you have two sauces, and the two sauces are like the magic of this sauce. One is this tamari sesame sauce, and then one is a creamy sriracha sauce.
Ooh.
And then it just gets served with sliced cucumbers and radishes and avocado, like so simple, such low lift. But the sauces are the thing that we love. And what my kids do now is they take the seaweed snacks and they make little sushi, like they eat it with their hands. Whereas my husband and I like it with a bowl with all of the sauces, and you get the creamy and the spicy and the crunchy and all that dynamic flavor. But the kids get to use it or eat it in the way that brings them joy too. So I think that is probably my family's favorite meal. It's like what my kids request more than anything. And I wouldn't have ever guessed that it would be salmon back in the day, to be honest. But the more they try things and the more their palates grow, and also they get to, with bowls, they get to eat them in the way that they love. So
Yeah.
that's fun.
That sounds fantastic. I could eat that right now. My stomach is actually growling. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna make that for dinner. Well, as we wrap up, where's the best place for people to connect with you? We've talked about a lot of different presence that you have
Yeah.
online, but where would you like people to go to find you? And I'll
Yeah.
put links in the show notes too.
Oh, great. Well, if you want to, I've got hundreds of recipes on my blog, and that's from scratchfast.com. But my newsletter is really where I want to direct people, and that's Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. I have a newsletter and a podcast, and I really explore how food and cooking can nourish us in a much deeper way than just physically, and how we can use the process of cooking to bring our lives more flavor. That sounds really cheesy, but more satisfaction, how we can find our way back home to ourselves through the simple act of eating and cooking. And so that's really my passion. And in my podcast, I get to speak with just amazing food writers and chefs and spiritual thinkers and scientists, all about kind of the overarching topic of food in our bodies and how we can reclaim our autonomy and our freedom and our sense of pleasure around these topics, which can, for a lot of people, come with a lot of tangled
Mm.
complication. It can be complicated. Not even just the act of getting dinner on the table can be complicated, but our own relationship to food can be complicated. And I really want to help people unravel that for themselves.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Nikki, for being on the program. Just such a pleasure to talk to you, and I've learned so much from you. And now I got to go make those salmon bowls.
Thank you. It's been such a joy connecting with you and talking with you. And I look forward to seeing what all that you have in store as well.
Well, thank you.